The hair was human head hair, and it was microscopically consistent with the defendant.
Yeah.
That was my finding 12 years ago, and it is my finding today.
Then read your own notes.
Young lady, you don't know the first thing about what happened.
Read them out loud. You told a jury it was human hair that matched my father. And you knew that was a lie. Your notes, your handwriting, the night you looked at it, say root absent, limited, cannot individualize. One of those is a lie. And you swore to both of them under oath.
That is not what my notes say. Those are working shorthand. My testimony was my considered.
Then read the shorthand to the court and let them decide.
Miss Mabry, you do not have the floor.
He's had the floor over 12 years, Simone said. My father's had a cell. I'm asking one thing. Make him read his own handwriting out loud, and if I'm wrong, I'll sit down and I'll never say another word. At the state's table, Corbin Frey rose without hurry, a tall man who had grown comfortable in the years since he'd won this case, and he addressed the bench like a man doing it a favor. Your Honor, this is a closed conviction. It was tried, it was appealed, it was affirmed. The witness is a nationally recognized examiner with 500 trials behind him. And that, he nodded at Simone, is the defendant's daughter, who was 6 years old at the time and has no standing to cross-examine anyone. The state asks that the gallery be seated and this hearing proceed on the papers. The defense filed those papers, said Corinne Ladd, from the other table, and the papers are the reason we're here. Ms. Mabry is my investigator of record. She found the notes, Your Honor. Nobody in this system found them in 12 years. An 18-year-old found them at a public records desk on a Tuesday. Prentice looked at Simone for a long moment. Sit down, Ms. Mabry, he said. You'll get your hearing, but you'll get it my way, one fact at a time. Do you understand me? Simone sat. She had waited 12 years. She could wait the length of a hearing. She had been 6 when they took him, and the thing she remembered was not the verdict. The thing she remembered was the glass. For 12 years, she had visited her father through a pane of scratched acrylic with a phone on a metal cord. And for 12 years, he had done the same thing at the start of every visit. He had pressed his palm flat against the glass, and she had pressed hers against it from the other side, small hand growing into a larger hand across the years. And neither of them had ever once been able to feel the other. That was what prison was, to Simone. Not the walls, the half-inch of plastic between her hand and her father's, always, every time. He had never let a visit be about the case. That was his rule, and he held it for 12 years. He wanted to know about school, about the team she'd made, about a classmate who was rude to her in the 9th grade, whom he threatened, through the glass, to have a word with, which made her laugh so hard the guard looked over. You can't have a word with anybody, Dad. You're in prison. I have a very long reach, Curtis had said gravely. I coach now. You know that? They gave me the yard team. Grown men, most of them meaner than that kid, and I've got them bunning. He'd pressed his hand to the glass. I teach them the same thing I taught you. You keep your eye on the one true thing, and you let everything else be noise. Works on a fastball. Works on a life. Works on a case, Simone had said when she was 16 and had started reading the file. No, he'd said, and his face had closed a little. Not that. I don't want you in that file, baby. That file's a hole. I climbed out of it by not looking down. You look down. It takes you. He'd tapped the glass. Promise me you'll live a life out there. That's the only thing I need. One of us has to have one. She had not promised. It was the only thing he ever asked her for that she refused to give. He had told her another thing, though. On one of the earliest visits, when she was small enough to still believe an adult could fix anything, and it had become the thing she steered her whole life by. Baby, Curtis Mabry had said, I need you to hear me. They're going to tell you your daddy did an awful thing. A lot of grown people in a room decided it, so it's going to sound true. But you know me. You hold on to what's true, even when the whole room lets go. That's the whole job. You hold on. She had held on. She had held on through the foster placement, and the second one, and the aunt who finally took her. She had held on through the years the appeals came back, stamp denied, when the lawyers stopped returning calls, when even her aunt started saying, maybe you have to make your peace, Simone. Maybe you have to live your own life. She had held on so hard that when it came time to pick a direction for that life, she had walked into a community college and signed up for forensic science, the exact science that had buried her father. Because the only way she knew to fight a thing was to learn it well enough to take it apart. And in her second year, she had started at 16 on a dual enrollment program, because the sooner she learned the science, the sooner she could turn it back on the men who'd used it. In a lab with a comparison microscope, an instructor had said the sentence that changed everything. They had been comparing hair samples, the whole class, matching knowns to unknowns, and Simone had gotten everyone right. And she'd raised her hand and asked the question she'd been carrying since she was 6. So if I match these, if I say they're consistent, how sure is that? If it was a trial, could I tell a jury it's his? No, the instructor said. Never. That's the first thing you have to unlearn if you've watched any television. You can say, consistent. You can say, cannot be excluded. You can never, ever say it's his. Because the microscope can't say that. 2 strangers can have hair you can't tell apart under this lens. Anybody who gets on a stand and tells 12 people a hair belongs to one specific human being is telling them something the science does not support. People went to prison on that for 50 years. There was a federal review. Most of those examiners overstated. Most of them. It's the great embarrassment of my field. How many people, Simone said. Her voice had gone strange. Went to prison, on a hair. Nobody really knows. Hundreds that came out. Probably more that didn't. The instructor looked at her. Are you all right, Ms. Mabry? Yes, Simone said. I just need to look at something. She sat very still at that microscope for a long time after the class emptied out. Then she had gone to the county records office and asked for everything in her father's case file that had never made it to trial. That's a lot of boxes for a closed case, the clerk had said. You a lawyer? I'm his daughter. The clerk had looked at her for a second and then gone and gotten the boxes without another word. And 3 weeks later, in a folder nobody had opened since her father was a free man, Simone had found Walter Kessler's original bench notes in his own hand, and she had read the words root absent, cannot individualize, questionable, and she had sat down on the floor of the records room because her legs stopped working, because she had understood, all at once, that the certainty that took her father was a thing somebody had simply made up on a bad afternoon and never taken back. Corinne Ladd ran an innocence clinic out of 2 rooms and a hallway at the law school, and she took Simone's box and read every page in it twice, and then she called her in and did not sugarcoat it. You found the crack, Ladd said. I want to be honest with you about how much wall is around it. You understand your father confessed to nothing, which helps. But he lost at trial, he lost on appeal, and the law loves finality more than it loves being right. To reopen this, I need more than a discrepancy in old notes. Kessler will get up there and say his notes were shorthand and his testimony was his considered opinion. And half the judges in this state were prosecutors who put people away on that man's word. I need something they cannot explain away. Then we test the hair, Simone said. Ladd looked at her. It still exists, Simone said. I checked the evidence log. 1 hair, retained, sealed. 12 years ago, they didn't have the DNA tools to test a single hair without a root. Now there's mitochondrial testing. It doesn't need the root. She had said this sentence in her head 100 times too. You can pull DNA off the shaft now. If it's my father's, I'll walk away and never bother you again. If it isn't, Ladd said slowly, then we don't just have a bad opinion. We have a fact. She sat back. It'll take a court order to open the seal. Frey will fight it, and we'll need a lab analyst the court trusts to do the work and testify. Not me, not you, someone with a license and a clean coat. Someone knew enough not to owe Walter Kessler anything. That someone turned out to be a young man named Elliot Pace. Elliot Pace was 30 and had been at the state lab for 2 years in a small new unit the legislature had funded after a scandal in another state, a unit whose entire job was to re-examine old convictions. It was not a popular unit. He ate lunch alone a lot. When the Mabry order landed on his desk, he almost handed it back, because the examiner of record was Walter Kessler, and Walter Kessler was the reason Elliot Pace had gone into forensics at all. He had read Kessler's textbook in school. He had, as a student, sat in a darkened lecture hall while a visiting instructor put a pair of microscope images on the screen and said, "This is the standard. This is what a defensible hair association looks like," and had copied it into his notes as a model. He had built himself, brick by brick, on the man's work. He opened the Mabry file anyway, because that was the job, and he read the trial testimony, and then he read the bench notes, and then he sat with the two of them side by side for a long time in an empty lab. The testimony said human head hair, microscopically consistent with the defendant to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. The bench notes said, in Kessler's own tight hand, one hair recovered, root absent, cortex obscured, limited, and then a word Elliot had to hold under a light to read, because it had been half crossed out. Questionable. A senior analyst named Dorsey found him still there at 7 that night, and looked over his shoulder at the two documents. "That's a Kessler," Dorsey said. "You reviewing a Kessler. The notes don't match the testimony. The notes never match the testimony." Dorsey said it like it was weather. "You'll find that on every one you pull." He wrote careful and testified certain. That was the man's whole method. Hedge in your notes, sell it on the stand. He straightened up. "Word of advice? Since nobody's given you one. There's a reason our unit gets the parking spots by the dumpster. You can look at these all day. The minute you try to put one in front of a judge, you'll learn how few friends you've got in this building. Pace, right? 2 years in. 2 years. 2 years is nothing. Kessler's got 40 and a wing of the academy named after him." Dorsey picked up his coat. "I'm not telling you to bury it. I'm telling you to know what it costs before you pick it up. Nobody in here's going to back you. I've watched them not back people before." "Somebody's father is in a cell," Elliot said. "Somebody's father is always in a cell," Dorsey said, not unkindly, and left. Elliot requested the physical evidence the next morning. The hair came up from the vault in a sealed envelope inside a sealed box, and Elliot Pace opened it under a camera with 2 witnesses present, the way you do when you know every second of it will be fought. And he mounted the single hair on a slide and put it under the comparison scope. And the first thing he felt was not triumph. It was cold, because he had looked at a great many human hairs, and this was not one. He called Simone and Corinne Ladd into the lab and did not tell them what he thought yet. He put the image up on the monitor and he said, "Tell me what you see," to Simone. Because Ladd had told him Simone had spent 2 years learning to look. Simone looked at the scale pattern on the shaft, the pigment, the medulla running down the center, thick and unbroken, and she had studied enough by then to feel the floor tilt. "That's not a person," she said quietly. "No," Elliot said, "it isn't. Human hair has a fragmentary medulla, if it has one at all. This medulla runs continuous, edge to edge, the whole length. That's an animal. I'd want the DNA to be certain, but morphologically," he stopped and made himself say it plainly, because plainly was the only honest way. "That is animal hair. A cat, most likely. Somebody testified for 2 days that this was a human head, hair that matched your father, and I don't believe it ever came off a human being." Nobody said anything. Then Simone said, "The Teals had a cat." Her voice was very far away. "It's in the crime scene photos. There's a cat bowl in the kitchen. I've looked at those photos 500 times. There's a cat." "Simone," Corinne Ladd said it carefully, "the way you say a thing to someone standing at an edge. I need you to hear me before you let this in. This is not the DNA. Morphology is an opinion. A good opinion from a good analyst. But Kessler will get on a stand and give a different opinion. And the whole reason we're here is that opinions about hair are worthless. We test it. Until the DNA comes back, we don't have a fact. We have a very strong feeling. Do you understand me?" "I understand you," Simone said. "Say it back to me." "We don't have it yet." Simone was still looking at the monitor, at the thick, unbroken line down the center of the thing that had taken her father's life. "But it's a cat, Corinne." "But it's a cat," Ladd admitted, quietly, and even she couldn't keep it all the way out of her voice. Elliot Pace sat down slowly at the bench. "I studied this case," he said, half to himself. "In school, they showed us this comparison as a model of good work. I have it in a notebook somewhere, in my own handwriting. Kessler's Hair Association, Mabry, textbook." He looked a little sick. "I learned how to do this on the case where he did it worst." The mitochondrial testing took 6 weeks, and while they waited, the people who had a great deal to lose began quietly to defend what they had. Lenore Ashby, who ran the crime lab, called Elliot into her office and closed the door, and was very warm about it. "I want to make sure you understand the position you're putting the lab in," she said. "If you get up in a courtroom and call Walter Kessler a fraud, you're not challenging one case. You're challenging every case he ever touched. Do you know how many that is? Do you know how many convictions in this state rest on his testimony? rapists, killers. If you pull this thread, some of them walk. On a technicality. Because a young analyst 2 years in decided he understood comparison microscopy better than the man who wrote the book on it. It's not a technicality if the hair is a cat, Elliot said. You don't have the DNA back yet. I have eyes, and I have his notes. Ashby's warmth cooled by exactly 1 degree. There was an internal review, she said, a few years ago, of Mr. Kessler's caseload. It's not been released. Elliot went still. What did it find? It's not been released, Ashby said again. And there are good reasons for that. And I'd hate for a promising analyst to attach his name to a document he was never authorized to see. Let the DNA come back. If it's animal, we'll handle it internally, quietly, the right way. You don't need to make a spectacle. She smiled. You have a career, Elliot. Don't set it on fire for a man you've never met. Simone did not wait for the DNA to sit on her hands. If the hair was a lie, she reasoned, then it was probably not the only one. And she said as much to Corinne Ladd across a table stacked with the clinic's old files. He testified in 500 trials, Simone said. If he made one up, he made up more. I want to read them. All of them. However many I can get. That's thousands of pages. That's months. I've got months. I've had 12 years. Simone was already pulling a legal pad toward her. Here's what I'm looking for. In my dad's notes, he described the hair a certain way. Length, color, no root, the characteristics. If he had a description he reached for whenever a case needed one, it'll show up again. Same hair, different defendant. Nobody catches it because nobody reads 2 of his cases side by side. I'm going to read them side by side. Ladd looked at her for a moment, and something in the older woman's face shifted from patience into respect. That, she said, is a real idea. That's not a daughter's idea. That's an investigator's idea. It took Simone 3 weeks and a lot of interlibrary requests, and she found it on a Thursday at a kitchen table at 1 in the morning, and she called Elliot instead of Ladd because Elliot would understand the science of it. Del Vos, she said, before he'd even finished saying hello. 8 years before my dad, Kessler testified. 1 hair, root absent, and Elliot, the description. Length in millimeters, color. The characteristics. It's word for word. It's the same hair. He gave the exact same hair to 2 different men in 2 different trials, 8 years apart. There was a silence on the line. You understand what that is, Elliot said quietly. Tell me I'm right. You're right. 1 hair can't be at 2 crime scenes and belong to 2 different people. It's not a mistake either. It's a signature. He had a description he kept in a drawer and pulled out whenever the prosecutor needed the hair to fit. She heard him let out a breath. Simone, I've been at this 8 years. School, a private lab, 2 years here. And it never once occurred to me to read 2 of his cases next to each other. You found it in 3 weeks. I had a reason to look, Simone said. Nobody else did. They tried Simone too, in the way the system tries people who have no money and no title. They made her small. Frey's office filed a motion arguing Simone Mabry had no standing to participate, that her personal involvement made her an unreliable investigator, that a defendant's own child rummaging in evidence rooms was exactly the kind of thing that contaminated cases. They asked the court to bar her from the counsel table. They argued it in front of Prentice on a gray morning, and Frey was smooth about it. Your Honor, I don't question the young woman's devotion. I question the propriety, chain of custody, objectivity, the appearance of the thing. You cannot have a defendant's daughter as the investigator who conveniently finds the evidence that frees her father. It's the definition of an interested party. Bar her from the table, let the professionals handle it, and the record stays clean. Corinne Ladd stood before Prentice could rule. Mr. Frey calls her an interested party like it's a disqualification, Ladd said. Your Honor, everyone in this room is an interested party. Mr. Frey is interested in a conviction he won. The lab is interested in a reputation. The only difference is that Ms. Mabry's interest was in the truth, and hers is the only interest in 12 years that produced any. She didn't manufacture that hair. She didn't write those notes. She found a public record on a public desk that this office had every opportunity to find and chose not to. If finding the truth disqualifies you from a courtroom, then this courtroom has a problem that is a great deal bigger than my investigator. Prentice looked at Simone. Ms. Mabry, you understand the concern. If you touched evidence, if you had access to that hair... I've never touched the hair, Simone said. I've never been in the vault. Everything I found on paper, at a counter, with a request slip. And there's a signature and a date on everyone. I learned how to do it right because I knew someone like Mr. Frey would come looking for a reason to say, I did it wrong. She met the judge's eyes. I didn't want to be in this courtroom, Your Honor. I wanted to be a normal person. This case made me an investigator. Don't let them use the thing they did to me as a reason not to listen to me. Prentice denied the motion. Simone kept her seat at the table, and Walter Kessler, who had never once raised his voice, came to the clinic himself. That was the part Simone never expected. He came in a good coat, an old man with kind eyes and clean hands, and he asked to speak with her, and Corinne Ladd stayed in the room with her arms folded. You've done remarkable work, Kessler told Simone, and he seemed to mean it. Truly, I've testified against defense investigators with 20 years on you who weren't half so thorough. I want you to understand, I'm not your enemy. I understand grief. A child loses her father, she needs a reason, and the science was wrong, is a kinder reason than the truth. What's the truth? Simone said flatly. That sometimes the man really did it, Kessler said gently, and the science only confirmed what the jury already knew in their bones. I gave 12 people the certainty they needed to do a hard thing. That's not a crime. That's a service. Juries can't convict on a maybe. Someone has to hand them the certainty, or nothing ever gets resolved, and the guilty go home. He rose. I looked at that hair for a very long time, dear. I stand by what I told them. You should prepare yourself for the possibility that your father is exactly where he belongs. He said it the way he'd said everything, softly, reasonably, and he let himself out. And Simone realized she was shaking, and that this time it was not fear. Corinne Ladd was already writing on a legal pad. Every word he said, time, date, the fact that he drove here himself. She still didn't look up. An expert witness for the state does not cross a city to lean on a defense investigator unless he's afraid of what she's found. He just handed us a guilty conscience with a signature on it, and I'm putting it in a motion before his car is warm. She finally looked up at Simone. Careful men make one kind of mistake, Simone. They can't help correcting the record. He came here to correct you. That's the tell. The low place came the way the low place always comes, from the person you least expect, for the kindest reason in the world. Simone went to see her father to tell him the hair was a cat. She had rehearsed how she would say it. She thought it would be the best day of her life. Curtis Mabry listened through the phone on the metal cord, with a half-inch of glass between them, and he did not light up the way she'd dreamed. He got very quiet and very tired-looking, and when she finished, he pressed his palm to the glass, and she pressed hers to it, and he said the thing that nearly ended it. Baby, I need you to stop. Dad, listen to me. I've been in here 12 years. I made my peace with it a long time ago because I had to, because a man can't survive in here on hope. Hope is the thing that kills you in here. His voice was steady, and that was the worst part. Every time you file something, I feel it start up again in my chest, that thing I killed on purpose so I could live. And then it gets denied, and I have to kill it all over again. I've done that 4 times now. I don't think I can do it a 5th. I'm 44 years old. I've got a rhythm in here. I teach a class. I coach the yard team. He almost smiled. You know they let me coach? Little baseball diamond in the yard. I'm all right, Simone. I have made myself all right. You're innocent. It was a cat, Dad. And I have watched innocent men in here hope themselves to death, Curtis said. I won't do it, and I won't watch you do it. You're 18. You've given your whole childhood to a box of papers. I want you to put it down and go live. That's the only thing I have left to give you. I can tell you to go, so I'm telling you. Let me go, please. Go be young. And he took his hand off the glass. He had never done that first. In 12 years, she had always been the one to break it, and he had always kept his palm up until her hand was gone. He took his hand down first and stood and let the guard walk him back, and Simone sat with her hand still flat against the glass and nothing on the other side of it, and for the first time in 12 years she thought, maybe I should stop. If someone you love has ever begged you to stop hoping for them, because your hope cost them more than their own ever could, then you already know the choice she's sitting with. Stay with her to the end of this one. You'll want to see what she does. She almost did. She did not tell Corinne Ladd about the visit. She stopped answering Elliot's calls for 4 days. She sat in her aunt's kitchen and looked at community college brochures for programs that had nothing to do with hair or death or courtrooms, programs a normal 18-year-old might pick, and she let herself imagine putting the box in a closet and closing the door. Her aunt sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee and did not pretend she couldn't see what was happening. "He told you to stop," her aunt said. "It wasn't a question. He took his hand off the glass first. He's never done that. That man has spent 12 years learning how to not want things, so it wouldn't kill him." Her aunt wrapped both hands around her cup. "I've been telling you to let it go since you were 14. You know that. I thought I was protecting you. I watched my brother go into that place, and I watched what waiting for a miracle did to your grandmother. It put her in the ground, and I decided I wasn't going to let it put you there too." She was quiet a moment, "But I was wrong about one thing, and I'll say it once. I thought you were waiting on a miracle. You weren't. You went and got a degree and read 10,000 pages and found the thing nobody found. That's not waiting, baby. That's the opposite of waiting." She pushed the brochures gently to the side. "So don't quit because he's scared. He's allowed to be scared. He earned it. You do what you were built to do." Simone looked at her aunt for a long time. "He said go be young," she said. "You were never young," her aunt said, not unkindly. "They took that too. Go finish it instead." And then the DNA came back. Elliot Pace drove to her aunt's house because she wouldn't pick up the phone, and he stood on the porch with a folder, and his face was doing something she couldn't read, and he said, "You need to see this, and then you can quit if you still want to. But you should see it first." The mitochondrial report had 2 findings. The first was that the hair recovered from Rosalind Teal's body contained no human mitochondrial DNA at all. It was feline, domestic cat. The single hair that Walter Kessler had told a jury was human head, hair consistent with Curtis Mabry, had never come off a human head. The second finding was the one Elliot had not gone looking for and could not stop looking at now. The lab, running the full workup, had also processed the fingernail scrapings from the victim, retained and never tested, because in a case with a hair match, nobody had bothered. There was human DNA under Rosalind Teal's nails. It was not Curtis Mabry's. It belonged to a man already in the state's own database, a man named Vernon Skaggs, who had been convicted 6 years after the Teal murder of breaking into a woman's home 3 streets over and killing her in nearly the same way. "He was out there," Elliot said quietly, "the whole time your father was inside. He did it again because your father was doing his time for him." Simone read the second page twice. Her hands did not shake. That was the thing she'd remember later. That at the exact moment she had every reason to fall apart. She went very calm, very cold, the way you do when a thing is finally too big for feelings. "Say her name," Simone said. "What?" "The second woman. Skaggs killed a second woman while my dad was inside for the first. She has a name. Say it." "I'd have to look. I don't." "Then we find it, and we say it in that courtroom." Simone folded the report closed, because that's the part that ends the "maybe he did it" from people like Frey. My dad, being innocent, they can argue around forever. A dead woman who didn't have to die because they wanted to be certain, instead of right. You can't argue around her. She's the whole case now. Her and a cat. Elliot looked at this 18-year-old standing on her aunt's porch, 4 days from quitting, and understood she was not going to quit, and had maybe never really been going to. "You asked me once why I don't just quit and keep my career," he said. "This is why." He held out the folder. "I built myself on that man's work, Simone. I was taught your father's case as a model of good science. I have signed my own name under the same words Kessler used, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, 12 times, because that's how they teach you to sound. I am one commendation away from being him. The only way I get to not be him is to stand up in that room and say what this says." Simone took the folder. "Then we're not quitting," she said. She went back to the glass one more time before the final hearing, and this time she did not ask her father's permission. "I know you told me to let you go," she said. "I'm not going to, and I need you to hear why, so you don't spend the next hearing trying to protect me from hope. Simone, you told me once to hold on to what's true even when the whole room lets go." She pressed her hand to the glass and made him meet her eyes. "You don't get to tell me that when I'm 6 and then take it back when it gets hard. It's not just your name anymore, Dad. It was a cat. And while you sat in here being all right, the man who actually did it walked into another woman's house and did it again, because everybody in that courtroom wanted to be certain, more than they wanted to be right. That's not your peace to make. That woman doesn't get peace. So I'm going to go into that room, and I am going to hold on. You raised me too. You don't get to be surprised." Curtis Mabry looked at his daughter through the glass for a long moment. And then something in his face broke open that had been sealed for 12 years, and he put his forehead against the acrylic, and she put hers against it, and it was the closest their two heads had been since she was 6 years old. "Okay," he said. "Okay, baby, hold on." The hearing to vacate the conviction of Curtis Mabry ran 2 days, and people who were there talk about it still. Elliot Pace testified for 3 hours. "Mr. Pace, put it in plain words," Corinne Ladd said. "What is on the courtroom monitor right now?" "That's the hair. The one hair recovered from Rosalind Teal, the hair Mr. Kessler testified about, at 400 times its size." "And what are we looking at in the middle of it, that dark line running the length?" "That's the medulla, the core of the hair. In a human head hair, the medulla is usually absent, or it's fragmented. It comes and goes like a dotted line. Look at this one. It runs edge to edge, continuous, thick, the entire length. Humans don't have that. Animals do." "So what is it?" "It's a cat," Elliot said. "Domestic cat. And once the mitochondrial testing came back, I didn't have to say, in my opinion, anymore. We ran human primers first, the tools that look for a human profile, and they came back with nothing. No human DNA on that hair at all. So we ran species identification. It came back Felis catus. Domestic cat. It is a cat hair. It was always a cat hair." Mr. Kessler told a jury it was a human head, hair consistent with Curtis Mabry. "Yes." "To a reasonable degree of scientific certainty." "Yes." "In your professional opinion, Mr. Pace, is there any honest way to look down a microscope at a cat hair and call it a human head hair belonging to a specific man?" Elliot was quiet for a second. He was aware of Kessler watching him from the second row, calm, patient, an old man with clean hands. "No," he said, "there isn't. You can be wrong about a lot of things at that lens. You cannot mistake a cat for a person. Not for 2 days of testimony. Not if you actually looked. Somebody who spent 40 years doing this does not look at that medulla and see a man. He saw what the case needed, and he wrote it down, and he said it under oath. That's not an error. An error is honest. This was a decision." Then Ladd walked him through the mitochondrial report, line by line, and he read the name Vernon Skaggs into the record, and he explained what fingernail scrapings were and why nobody had tested them, and the courtroom got very quiet. "One more thing for the record, Mr. Pace," Ladd said. "This man, Vernon Skaggs, was he in custody at the time of the Teal murder?" "No, he was free for 6 more years." "And in those 6 years, was he convicted of anything?" "Yes. The murder of a woman in her own home, 3 streets from the Tealy house, in nearly the same manner." "Does that woman have a name?" "She does." Elliot looked down at the record in his hand, and then he looked up and away from it, because Simone had asked him to say it to the room and not to the paper. Her name was Ada Merrick. She was 31 years old. She did not have to die. The man who killed her was walking free the entire time Curtis Mabry was serving his sentence for it. She is the price of the certainty this court was handed 12 years ago. The courtroom did not make a sound. Frey's own cross-examination was brief, because there was nothing to ask a cat hair, and every question he opened made it worse, and he knew it, and after 3 questions, he sat down. And then Corinne Ladd did the thing that turned the hearing from a defense into an indictment. She had found the other case. "Mr. Pace," she said, "in the course of this review, did you examine other testimony by Walter Kessler?" "I did." "Are you familiar with the conviction of a man named Del Voss in an unrelated matter 8 years before the Teal murder?" Frey was on his feet. Prentice waved him down. "I am now," Elliot said. "In that case, Mr. Kessler testified to a single questioned hair, root absent, which he described as consistent with the defendant, Del Voss, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. The description of the hair in his notes, length, color, characteristics, is to the millimeter identical to his description of the hair in Mr. Mabry's case." "Explain to the court what that means." "It means," Elliot said, "that either the same hair was found at 2 crime scenes 8 years apart, which is impossible, or Mr. Kessler had a description he reached for whenever the case needed one. He wasn't reporting what he saw down the microscope. He was reporting what the case required. In Mr. Mabry's file, the case required a human hair, so he wrote one. There was never anything under that lens but a cat." Walter Kessler took the stand in his own defense, calm as ever, and he did not break, because men like Walter Kessler do not break. They simply keep believing all the way down that they were right. "I gave juries certainty," he told the court, and he said it almost proudly. You sit where I sat for 40 years. You learn something the lawyers never learn. A jury does not want a probability. They cannot send a man away on a probability. Their conscience won't let them. And so nothing gets done, and the guilty walk free while the experts hedge. I did not hedge. I gave them a floor to stand on. If I was certain, and the microscope was not, well, the microscope never had to look that mother in the eye. I did. He folded his clean hands. I am not ashamed of a single day of it. Corinne Ladd let that hang in the air, and then she walked to the monitor. Mr. Kessler, you testified on direct that your bench notes were working shorthand. Your shorthand, in this case, includes the word questionable, half crossed out. What was questionable? I don't recall a specific. You wrote it. In the case of Del Vos, 8 years earlier, you described a single questioned hair. Would you read the court your description of the Vos hair, and then your description of the Mabry hair? She placed 2 pages in front of him. Take your time. Kessler looked at that 2 pages, and for the first time all day, he did not immediately speak. They're similar, he said finally. They're identical, millimeter for millimeter. 2 hairs, 2 crime scenes, 8 years apart, 2 different men sent to prison. And the same hair under your microscope both times. Explain that to the court. Hairs can be similar. A hair can be similar to another hair, Ladd said. A hair cannot be the exact same hair as a hair from a different crime 8 years before, unless it isn't a real observation at all, unless it's a description you kept and reused. Isn't that what happened, Mr. Kessler? You had a form of words that got convictions, and you used it whenever a prosecutor needed the hair to fit. I gave my honest professional opinion in every... Mr. Kessler, Corinne Ladd said very quietly, the hair was a cat. The defendant, Kessler said, was a criminal. The defendant coached a children's baseball team, and mopped a school, and raised a daughter who took your career apart with a library card. Ladd let that land. You didn't give them a floor to stand on. You dug a hole and painted it to look like a floor, and a man fell in it for 12 years, and 8 Americas dead because you were so busy being certain you never once were right. No further questions. Corbin Frey was supposed to argue against vacating the conviction. That was his job. His whole career had risen out of the Mabry case. The young prosecutor who'd won it had become the district attorney who could never afford to say it was wrong. He stood up when Prentice called on him, and he had a legal pad, and everyone watched him look down at it and then, slowly, set it face down on the table. Your Honor, 12 years ago, I stood in a courtroom not far from this one, and I told a jury that a single hair placed Curtis Mabry in that house, and I believed it, because a man in a white coat, with 500 trials behind him, told me it was certain. And I was young, and I wanted to win, and I did not ask the question I should have asked. He was not looking at his notes anymore. I have built an office on convictions from that lab. If I fight this today, I might save my office some embarrassment for another year or 2. But there is a hair on that monitor that is a cat. And there is DNA under that poor woman's fingernails that belongs to a man who was free to kill again while Mr. Mabry sat in a cell. And I will not stand in this room and argue that a thing I now know to be false should stand because it would be inconvenient for me to admit it. He turned toward the defense table, toward Curtis Mabry, who had been brought in for the ruling in a jumpsuit and chains. The people withdraw their opposition. The people join the motion to vacate, and the people owe this man an apology that no motion can carry. Judge Warren Prentice did not recess. He had read every page too. The conviction of Curtis Mabry is vacated, he said. The indictment is dismissed. Mr. Mabry, the state of... His voice caught, and he let it, and did not hide it. This court took 12 years from you on the word of a hair that was never yours. It was never even human. There is no sentence I can pronounce that gives those years back. You are free. You have been innocent the entire time. Bailiff, take those chains off him. Take them off him now. They took the chains off Curtis Mabry, and he stood in the middle of the courtroom, rubbing his wrists like a man who did not quite believe they were his own. And he turned around looking for the one face he had watched grow up through half an inch of plastic. Simone was already coming over the rail, and for the first time in 12 years, there was no glass. She hit him at a run the way she had when she was 6, and this time there was nothing between her hand and her father. Nothing at all. And he held on to her with both arms in the middle of that room full of people and pressed his hand flat against her back and felt it. Actually felt it. Warm and real and there. And he said into her hair the only thing he had ever really taught her. You held on. You told me to, Simone said, even when the whole room let go. You said that was the whole job. I said a lot of things through that glass I didn't think you'd actually do, Curtis said. And he laughed, wet and broken and free, and held her out at arm's length to look at her, and then pulled her back in. You listened to the one I meant most and the one I meant least, and you couldn't tell which was which, so you just held on to all of it. That's your fault, Simone said into his shoulder. You should have been clearer. No, Curtis said. No, I think you heard me exactly right. Vernon Skaggs was charged with the murder of Rosalind Teal within the year. The internal review Lenore Ashby had buried was pried loose by the Attorney General's office, and it named more than 100 convictions that rested on Walter Kessler's certainty, and each one of them became a door somebody had to walk back through, slowly, one file at a time, and the walking is not finished even now. Walter Kessler was never charged. He died the next winter, honored in his own mind to the end, certain, a man who had spent 40 years handing frightened people a floor that was not there and never once let himself look down. But he did not go unsentenced. His sentence was the walking back. One file, one name, one freedman at a time, of everything he had ever built. And it went on long after he was in the ground. And it is going on still. Elliot Pace kept his job, barely, and then could not stop. He asked for the rest of the boxes. He is still opening them. And Curtis Mabry went home to a small apartment with his daughter and could not sleep the first few nights because the bed was too soft and the room was too quiet and there was no glass anywhere. And on the third night, Simone found him standing in the dark kitchen with his hand flat against the window, palm to the cold glass, the way he had for 12 years. And she came and stood beside him and did not say anything. And after a while, he took his hand off the window and put his arm around his daughter instead. Because he could. Because he was allowed to now. And that was the whole difference. And it was everything. A jury cannot convict on a maybe. 12 ordinary people needed to sleep at night, and a man in a white coat understood that better than anyone. And so he handed them a certainty that did not exist, built out of a single hair. It took one hair to bury Curtis Mabry. It was never his. It was never even human. It only had to be certain. And everyone in that room preferred a comfortable lie in a lab coat to an honest, we don't know, because the lie let them go home. His daughter didn't go home. She held on to what was true, even when the whole room let go. Even when the one person she was holding on for begged her to stop, because he loved her and could not bear to hope again. She held on anyway. She held on because a thing being true does not stop being true just because everyone in the room, including the man it would save, has agreed to let it fall. That was the whole job. It was always the whole job. And it only ever takes one person in the room still willing to do it.